Hi everyone, my name is Kartik and my channel is on mental models. In this video I'll be talking about probabilistic thinking. This is one of the best mental models we have to improve the accuracy of our decisions and achieve positive outcomes. I will be developing further from my two previous videos on distribution and Bayes' theorem, Bayesian thinking. So please do watch them before you watch this video, as it will help your understanding a lot more about probabilistic thinking. The links to both videos are in the description below, and there should be a link hovering up here too. So let's consider the scenario that you start work at 9 AM. The commute to work takes 40 minutes and you wake up at 8:50. So you wake up at 8:50. The commute is 40 minutes and you start work at 9 AM. So the question is, will you get to work on time? So that's the question given these parameters. Now, this isn't a riddle. There aren't any smoke and mirrors. It's a simple question of, will you get to work on time if you wake up at 8:50 and you have a commute of 40 minutes? My answer to the question is essentially, no, you won't get to work on time. If you need to get to work at 9 o'clock and it takes you 40 minutes of travel, then if you wake up at 8:50, you will be late. And just for the avoidance of doubt, there is no work from home option. It'll probably take you more than 10 minutes to get changed into your work clothes, I suppose. Now let's change the wake up time to 7:30 AM. Again, you have a 40-minute commute and you start work at 9 AM. So again, the same question is, will you make it to work on time? Now, as I've said, you wake up at 7:30, so you now have 90 minutes in total to get ready and make your way to work. The travel time is, again, the same, 40 minutes. And so there is still another 50 minutes for you to get ready, have breakfast, take a shower, etc. So most likely you will make it on time for this one. One final iteration. What if you wake up at 8 AM? Again, 40 minutes. Nothing else changes and your start time is 9 o'clock. Now what? That's only 1 hour in total, and there is 40 minutes of travel time, which leaves 20 minutes for everything else. So you may be thinking it takes you 15 minutes to get ready, plus 40 minutes of travel without any delays on public transport, which totals 55 minutes. So theoretically, you make it to work at 8:55. Now, as our start time is 9 AM, this is very close to the start time. And so answering this as a yes, I will be on time, or no, I will be late, will be difficult, and it may not be the best approach. A better approach to answering this question is with probabilities. So you could say something like 8:55 is very close to 9 AM, but I will still be on time, assuming there are no unexpected delays, such as trains being delayed or someone at home jumping into the shower before me. Therefore, I have a 60% chance of being on time and a 40% chance of being late. Now, this 60-40% is just something that I've made up, and this scenario actually is quite mundane, but the point I'm making is that much of life's scenarios I like this 8 a.m. example. They are fuzzy and more often than not can't be answered by a straightforward yes or no, which from a probabilistic thinking perspective would be 100% and 0% respectively. In this scenario, we're also answering a simple question of, will you be on time for work? But in life, the question is somewhat the reverse, such as, what time do I wake up to make sure that I am on time for work or school? Throughout life, you will need to estimate the likelihood of specific outcomes, and so you should get into the habit of thinking in probabilities, probabilistic thinking. And most importantly is the ability to determine accurate probabilities. And how accurate your probabilities are will, over the long term, dictate how good your outcomes are. So we need to get into that habit of, I've just made these up, but we need to get into a habit of getting this accurate, the 60% and the 40% accurate. So how do we form accurate probabilities? There are 6 things. So accurate probabilities. I'm going to note them down here on the side. There are sort of 6 things. I'm going to leave this side free for workings. So the first 3 are quite simple and quite intuitive. First one is knowledge about the subject. The second thing is your experience or experiences, basically your life experience. And then thirdly, logic. What does logic dictate? Does this sound like common sense? Will I make it on time if I wake up at 8:50 and I've got a 40-minute commute? There's logic in that. Then there is Bayesian thinking, which is connected to all of these. Now, we've looked at the maths in the previous video, so we know it works. So where is Bayes' theorem, Bayesian thinking, relevant in general situations, and how is it connected to knowledge, experience, and logic? The background is that human judgments can irrationally contradict what documented facts and their associated probabilities suggest. And although people are not expected to have perfect information, the question is whether people even think to consider the probability of a given situation. Now, if you were given some information along the lines of someone led an active life, they played team sports, and they had a membership at the local gym which they used, and they had a well-paid office job. So it wasn't manual labour, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, they died in 2022. So the question is, are they more likely to have died in a cycling accident or with a coronary heart disease. So pause the video and have a go at answering what you think. Is the person more likely to have died in a cycling accident or with a coronary heart disease? So, if you listened to my information and thought that it fits the view that the person is more likely to have had a cycling accident, so you thought of this one, then this is actually irrational. Rationality, I just want to add, is not about knowing facts. It's about recognizing which facts are relevant. It's irrational, so the cycling accident is irrational because the fact suggests that there were 15 times as many deaths due to heart disease in 2022 than there were deaths and serious injuries by cycling accidents. So if we sort of look at that graphically, you've got a big square and there are 160 people in total in this square, just write that at the top, then of these, 10 people had the cycling accident or died from a cycling accident, and 150, so this sort of bigger portion here, 150 people died from heart disease in that year. I'm not going to draw a bike. And the point, as I mentioned a few moments ago, is not that you knew the facts, but it's even if you thought to consider the probability of this situation, so this probability. The new information, which is what I've given you here, should update your beliefs rather than lead you to disregard the old information or any old information that you already have. Now, if you thought, okay, I've got to this answer, but if you thought that given the information, let's say 50% of cycling deaths would fit a person of this profile, so someone that has this lifestyle, 50% of of the people in this population would fit this profile, would have a cycling death if they were living their life like this. But only 10% would die from heart disease with that same profile. So, and that's what's led you to this cycling accident answer. And so, in your view, you're sort of saying it's 5 times more likely. It's 5 times more. But even then, 50% of 10 people is 5, and 10% of 150 people is 15. So it's sort of 5 versus 15. So in terms of a probability, your hypothesis of the cycling accident is 5 over 5 plus 15, which is 5 over 20, which is 25%. So that's the probability, even with this information factored in, which is this little calculation here. So we've got to 25%. So even though you think a cycling death is 5 times more likely with the profile of this person, that is still not enough to overcome the fact that there are a lot more deaths from heart disease. So putting this all together, going back to sort of probabilistic thinking, how does this all fit together? Putting this all together, there are three parts to Bayesian thinking. First is the prior information, which in this scenario would be everything. So it would be 1 over 16. So 1 in 16 people, or 10 out of 160 people, have died from a cycling accident. So 10 divided by 160 is 116. So that's the prior information. Then there is the likelihood, which is fitting any new information to what we think. So in this case, it is the 50%. We think that there is a 50% chance, or 50% of all cycling deaths fit a person of this profile. And finally, the third thing is our belief after we see the information and we compute everything. So this sort of 25%, this is called the posterior. Now, I haven't written any of these words down. So there's the prior, the likelihood, and the posterior. I haven't written any of these words down because it's not so important to remember the words. It's more important to sort of be able to visualize this and be able to get to a probability rather than understand the terms. And so that's where Bayesian thinking comes in. And so once we put this all together, we're able to compute a number at the end of it. Number 5 is normal distribution. If we know we have a situation where there is a normal distribution, then we can quickly identify the most likely outcomes. In other words, 68% of them. So this is what a normal distribution looks like. So this was, I'm just going to call it Bayes. And this is normal distribution. You've got your axes, very simply something like that. And so the deviation is quite narrow. And going back to what I've just said, if we know we have a situation where there is a normal distribution, then we can quickly identify the most likely outcomes and form our probabilities. What we need to be aware of is where there are wider distributions. So in a normal distribution, the extremes are rare. As you can see, the ends are quite low. The extremes are rare and therefore predictable, as there is only so much deviation. So going back to the video sort of said here, this is the average, and 2/3 looks like that, which captures a lot of what could happen, the likely outcomes, because it's so neatly clustered to close to the average. And so therefore the extremes are rare, and because they are rare, they are more predictable, as there's only, as I said, so much deviation from the average scenario. But with wider distributions, the more extreme events are possible. So if I draw that out here with, so I've got my normal distribution there, and got something like that. And so again, they look similar. This is my average. They look similar, but with wider distributions, the more extreme events are possible. You can see it doesn't really come down. The graph doesn't really come down closer to zero. It's slowly reducing. And so with this slow reduction, any specific extreme event is still less likely. But as there are a higher number of options available in the extremes, we can't simply rely on the average outcomes or the outcomes closer to the average, because the extremes can happen. And the reason why I'm saying this is we can use this knowledge to form our probabilities, to understand if a scenario is more likely to have a normal or a wider distribution, and then plan accordingly. The idea is not to be afraid and just sort of think everything is in the extremes and we don't know what to do, how can I form a probability? It's to understand each scenario and think, is this scenario going to have a wider distribution, or is this going to have a more of a normal distribution? Are we sort of in this territory here, or are we in another territory, something like, say, understanding someone's wealth, because there you can have a wider distribution of people's wealth. It's not all clustered into the center, whereas sort of waking up time to getting to work on time, you can sort of work out what the best time is, and within a little bit of deviation either side of whatever your wake up time is, you know you will get to work on time. You're not going to be in the extremes too much. So it's not to think that everything is a wide distribution or everything is in the extremes. It's all about understanding what scenario is where and then planning accordingly. And because you've planned accordingly, you will overcome the surprise of an extreme event happening. Finally, so there were 6 things. Finally, number 6, similar to metacognition. Check out my previous video. There is something called probability. Meta-probability. This is the probability that our estimates are any good. So it's me coming up with the 60% chance of me being on time versus the 40% chance. How good is that anyway? I could be completely wrong. I might be sort of saying, oh, there's 80% chance of rain this afternoon, but I'm just rubbish at estimates, so it might not rain at all, even though I said there's an 80% chance of rain. And so that's what this concept is. It's about understanding how good our probabilities are. In a nutshell, people tend to be over-optimistic with their estimates. And we need to factor this asymmetry into our thinking. And the reason why it's asymmetry is because we tend to be over-optimistic and get things wrong, but we don't have the same sort of failure rate, as it were, being under-optimistic, being conservative. And so there is an asymmetry. And this specific sort of idea, meta-probability, may be hard to overcome, but realizing that there is an asymmetry in the estimation of the probability can help us against wild guesses. And so in this way, we can get into the habit of thinking in probabilities. We will never get exact precision, and this model doesn't guarantee 100% success, but it is still an extremely valuable mental model to know about and to practice, because the more you practice, the more you sort of employ a Bayesian thinking approach, the more you sort of understand normal distributions when you see situations, the more you think about meta probability, the more experience you have, the more knowledge you gain about each subject, which means that your priors are more realistic and you can sort of get to a better likelihood, will all together help you get accurate probabilities. And the more accurate your probabilities, the more chance of your outcomes being better. And so this is why it is such a valuable mental model. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't done so already, watch this video on Bayes' theorem, Bayesian thinking, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.